The annual Sterling Corp leadership retreat was in full swing, a lavish affair at a five-star lakeside resort, when my husband, Leo, made his grand announcement. He stood before a circle of his colleagues, his arm draped casually around his direct supervisor, Sylvia, and flashed the charming smile that had always been his greatest asset. "Sylvia and I have some exciting news," he declared, his voice booming with false importance. "Given our incredible success with the Q3 projects, the board has approved a special discretionary bonus for us, a private trip to Monaco to scout European expansion opportunities. We leave tonight." As the group erupted in a chorus of congratulations and envious sighs, and as Leo soaked in the admiration, he shot me a quick, almost pitying glance from across the patio. I, his supposedly unassuming wife, was merely a +1, a quiet observer on the sidelines of his glorious career. He had no idea that the board he spoke of reported directly to me. He didn't know that I, the woman he was publicly abandoning for a work trip, had been appointed the new global CEO of Sterling Corp just last week. As he and Sylvia clinked their champagne glasses, celebrating a trip they'd funded by defrauding the company, I smiled, took a delicate sip of my own champagne, and prepared to rewrite the agenda. This leadership retreat was about to get a very real lesson in corporate governance, and before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Let me paint you a picture of the man I married, or at least, the man I thought I had married. Leo Vance was a masterpiece of ambition, a perfectly sculpted monument to corporate striving. We met in business school, a whirlwind of late-night study sessions, shared dreams whispered over cheap coffee, and a belief that together we could conquer the world. He was the charismatic orator, the one who could sell ice in a blizzard, while I was the quiet strategist, the one who saw the patterns and pathways that others missed. I was drawn to his energy, the way he filled every room with an infectious confidence. He was studying marketing. I was focused on corporate finance and operational management. It felt like we were two halves of a perfect whole. For 10 years, our life followed the blueprint we'd designed. We married a year after graduation, bought a beautiful home in a quiet, leafy suburb, and dedicated ourselves to our careers. Leo joined Sterling Corp, a massive player in the logistics and supply chain industry, and began his methodical climb up the corporate ladder. He was a regional sales director, a job that demanded long hours and frequent travel, but it paid handsomely. He was good at it, or so the world believed. He had an almost supernatural ability to read people, to tell them exactly what they wanted to hear, and to project an image of unwavering competence and loyalty. He was the golden boy of his division, the one his superiors pointed to as a model of dedication. Meanwhile, I had carved my own path. I joined a boutique consulting firm, specializing in corporate restructuring and turnarounds. My work was my passion. I loved the challenge of parachuting into a struggling company, diagnosing its deep-seated problems, and architecting a strategy for its revival. I was the silent fixer, the one who worked behind the scenes, my name rarely appearing in the press releases, but always on the confidential reports that determined the fates of multi-million-dollar enterprises. My success was quiet but substantial. I operated under my maiden name, a professional choice I'd made early on to keep my work life separate from my personal life, a decision that would prove to be cosmically fortunate. Our marriage, I thought, was a partnership built on mutual respect. We were a power couple, albeit a lopsided one in the public eye. At company functions, I was Leo's wife, a pleasant, intelligent woman who smiled supportively as he networked. No one knew that my annual income dwarfed his, or that the simple consulting work I did involved firing and hiring the very type of executives he so desperately sought to impress. I never corrected their assumptions. I was proud of Leo's drive, and I believed his success was our success. I found his ambition endearing, even when it bordered on obsessive. He would spend hours recounting his office triumphs, detailing the political maneuvers and strategic alliances he was forging. I would listen, offer advice from my own deep well of experience, and feel a sense of shared purpose. The trouble, like a hairline crack in a foundation, began about a year ago with the arrival of Sylvia Croft. She was his new supervisor, the vice president of regional sales. At first, the mentions were professional, almost reverent. Sylvia has this incredible vision for the European market, he'd say, his eyes gleaming with an intensity I hadn't seen in years. She's a true trailblazer, and she sees my potential. The frequency of her name in our conversations grew exponentially. It was no longer just about work. It was, Sylvia thinks we should try that new Michelin-starred restaurant. Sylvia sent me this article on Italian leather shoes. Sylvia says the key to success is to live the part. His entire persona began to shift, subtly at first, then with alarming speed. He upgraded his wardrobe, trading his reliable Brooks Brothers suits for tailored Italian brands that cost a small fortune. He developed a sudden passion for vintage watches and single malt scotch, hobbies that mirrored Sylvia's own tastes, which he described in exhaustive detail. He started working later, and later the late nights punctuated by hushed, urgent phone calls he'd take on the patio. When I asked, the answer was always the same. It's Sylvia. We're on the verge of a massive breakthrough, and she needs me. He was becoming a caricature of a high-flying executive, a role he was playing for an audience of one. The distance between us grew into a chasm. Our conversations, once filled with shared dreams, became transactional. We discussed bills, home maintenance, and the logistics of our increasingly separate schedules. The easy intimacy we once shared, the late-night talks and shared laughter, evaporated, replaced by a polite, professional courtesy. He was a housemate, a business partner in the enterprise of our life. But the husband I had loved was fading away. I felt a growing unease, a gnawing suspicion that I dismissed as paranoia. I was busy, stressed with my own demanding career. Perhaps I was imagining things, projecting my own exhaustion onto him. I wanted to believe in the man I married. I wanted to believe in the life we had built. But in the quiet moments when he was asleep beside me, his phone glowing with a new message on the nightstand, a cold dread would wash over me. I was a woman trained to spot deception in corporate balance sheets and executive statements, yet I was willfully ignoring the glaring red flags in my own home. The event that shattered my willful ignorance wasn't a single discovery, but a slow, horrifying cascade of revelations made possible by the greatest secret I'd ever kept from my husband. 3 months ago, I was approached by a headhunting firm with an audacious proposal. The board of directors for Apex Holdings, the parent company of Sterling Corp, was looking for a new CEO. They needed a turnaround specialist, someone with a proven track record of ruthless efficiency and strategic vision to streamline their vast portfolio of companies. My name was at the top of their list. The interview process was a whirlwind of clandestine meetings in private airport lounges and encrypted video calls. I was vetted, tested, and scrutinized by some of the sharpest minds in the financial world. And I won. The offer was staggering, a chance to take the helm of a global powerhouse. There was just one condition. My appointment had to remain confidential until the official announcement at the annual leadership retreat. The outgoing CEO was retiring, and the board wanted a seamless transition to avoid market instability. I would be a ghost, a phantom leader, observing the company from the inside before my public coronation. I accepted. The irony was almost too perfect. I would be Leo's new boss, several times removed. The thought was amusing, a fun little secret to hold until the big reveal. I imagined his face when I walked on stage, the shock, the pride. I was so naive. Thaumana. My first act as the CEO in waiting was to conduct a deep, comprehensive audit of Sterling Corp's operations. From a secured data room, I was granted access to everything: personnel files, internal communications, and most importantly, financial records. I started with Leo's division, wanting to get a clear picture of the man my husband worked for and the team he was a part of. I began with the expense reports, a mundane but often revealing place to start. And that's when the ground beneath my feet began to crumble. I found Leo's file and began to scroll through years of submissions. At first, it was all standard: flights, client dinners, hotel stays that aligned with his travel schedule. But as I got to the last 12 months, the period since Sylvia's arrival, the numbers began to swell. The client dinners became extravagantly expensive, often at restaurants in cities he wasn't scheduled to be in. There were charges for five-star hotels on weekends, categorized as extended client negotiations. There were receipts for corporate gifts that included designer handbags and jewelry from Cartier. It was brazen. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't just a few padded expenses. This was systematic fraud. With trembling hands, I cross-referenced the dates of the expenses with our shared calendar. A mandatory sales conference in Chicago corresponded with a weekend charge from a luxury spa resort in Napa Valley. An emergency client visit to Dallas matched a receipt from a beachfront hotel in Miami. Every trip, every late night, every work crisis was a lie, meticulously documented and paid for by the company. His company. My company. The most damning evidence came from the travel authorizations. I pulled up Sylvia Croft's expense reports and laid them side by side with Leo's. The overlap was perfect, a mirror image of deception. They had attended the same conferences that never happened, stayed in the same business hotels, and entertained the same clients who didn't exist. They weren't just colleagues, they were partners in crime, funding a lavish lifestyle with stolen money. I saw receipts for couples massages, romantic dinners for two, and tickets to Broadway shows, all cleverly disguised as corporate expenses. He wasn't just cheating on me, he was making me a beneficiary of his crimes, as the fraudulent reimbursements were deposited into our joint bank account. The professional investigator in me took over, a cold, methodical calm descending to suppress the raging emotional storm. I started a new file on my secure server, labeling it Project Nightingale, a reference to the way he sang Sylvia's praises. I began to build a case, not as a betrayed wife, but as a CEO, uncovering a conspiracy within her own ranks. I documented every fraudulent receipt, every falsified report, every lie. I created a timeline so precise, so irrefutable, that it could be presented in a federal court. I investigated Sylvia Croft. Her personnel file painted a picture of a moderately successful but unremarkable executive. She wasn't the visionary Leo described. She was a middle manager with a history of lateral moves and a reputation for leveraging personal relationships for professional gain. She had been flagged in 2 previous companies for inappropriate conduct with a subordinate, but nothing was ever proven. She was a predator, and my husband, my brilliant, ambitious Leo, had walked straight into her trap. Or perhaps, he had been a willing participant. The pain was a physical thing, a crushing weight on my chest. The man I had loved and supported, the man whose ambition I had championed, was a common thief. His success, the success that was supposed to be the bedrock of our shared future, was a house of cards built on a foundation of lies. The expensive suits, the fancy watches, the confident swagger, it was all a costume, funded by embezzlement. And the woman he admired, the mentor he revered, was his accomplice. This retreat, this gathering of the company's top leaders, was supposed to be the pinnacle of my career, the moment I stepped into the light. Instead, it was shaping up to be the stage for the demolition of my entire life. But as I sat there, in the sterile quiet of the data room, surrounded by the digital debris of my shattered marriage, a new feeling began to emerge, eclipsing the pain, a cold, hard, and unyielding resolve. Leo and Sylvia thought they were clever. They thought they were playing a game that no one else understood. They had no idea that the person they were stealing from was now the one holding all the cards. The game was over, they just didn't know it yet. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. In the 2 weeks leading up to the leadership retreat, I lived a surreal, double life. By day, I was the clandestine CEO of Apex Holdings, working with the board to finalize the transition, reviewing strategic plans, and making executive decisions that would shape the future of thousands of employees. I was decisive, analytical, and emotionally detached, the consummate professional. By night, I went home and played the part of the supportive wife to a man I now knew was a stranger, a criminal, who was betraying me in every conceivable way. It was the most difficult performance of my life, and I watched him pack for the retreat with a sense of clinical fascination. He laid out his expensive, fraudulently funded suits, polished his Italian leather shoes, and spoke with breathless excitement about the opportunity to network with the C-suite titans. He was particularly thrilled about the impending announcement of the new CEO. "This is my chance, Arya," he said, his eyes shining with that familiar, ambitious fire. The old CEO was a relic. This new leader is supposed to be a real shark, a turnaround artist. If I can get on their radar this weekend, there's no telling how high I can go. The irony was so thick I felt like I could choke on it. He was rehearsing his pitch for me, practicing how he would sell himself to the woman whose life he was systematically destroying. He spoke of Sylvia constantly, framing their relationship as a strategic alliance destined for greatness. "Sylvia and I have been working on a presentation for the board," he'd lie, standing in our bedroom. "We've identified some key European markets that are ripe for penetration. This trip to Monaco we've been approved for is the culmination of months of work. I knew from the company records that no such presentation existed. There was no board approval. The Monaco trip was a vacation they had booked on a secret credit card, which I had already flagged in my investigation." He was so confident in his lies, so cocooned in his own arrogance, that he didn't notice the change in me. He didn't see the steel in my eyes, or the way my smile no longer reached them. He saw what he'd always seen, his quiet, unassuming, supportive wife. My invisibility had become my greatest weapon. Didn't I? My investigation had moved beyond just financial fraud. I had hired a private investigator, a discreet professional I'd used for corporate cases, to provide physical surveillance. The report he delivered was as sordid as it was heartbreaking. It contained photographs of Leo and Sylvia meeting at clandestine locations, dimly lit bars, boutique hotels, and even a rented apartment in the city that Sylvia kept for their trysts. There were images of them kissing, holding hands, their body language leaving no doubt about the nature of their relationship. The PI had even captured audio of a conversation where they openly mocked me. "Arya has no clue," Leo's voice said, laced with a smug superiority. "She's so wrapped up in her little consulting projects, she wouldn't notice if the house burned down around her." Sylvia had laughed, a sharp, cruel sound. "That's the best kind of wife to have, the kind who pays the bills and doesn't ask questions." Every word was a shard of glass in my heart. The betrayal wasn't just about infidelity and theft. It was about contempt. He saw me as a convenience, a stable platform from which to launch his sordid ambitions. My love, my support, my trust. These were not treasures to be cherished, but resources to be exploited. The pain was immense, but it was also clarifying. It burned away any lingering doubt, any shred of hope that this could be a misunderstanding. It forged my resolve into something unbreakable. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The day of the retreat arrived. We drove to the lavish lakeside resort together, the tension in the car a palpable entity. He was buzzing with excitement, practicing his talking points, while I was a silent vessel of cold fury. When we checked in, he immediately spotted Sylvia across the lobby and his face lit up. He abandoned me with our luggage to rush to her side. I watched them embrace, a hug that was far too long, too intimate for mere colleagues. They stood there, laughing and whispering, a united front of deceit. They were so sure of themselves, so confident in their secret world. They zite. I spent the first day of the retreat in the background, observing. I was introduced to dozens of executives as Leo's wife. I smiled, shook hands, and made polite small talk, all the while gathering data. I saw the dynamics of power, the alliances, the rivalries. I saw how Leo and Sylvia operated, moving through the crowd as a pair, finishing each other's sentences, their hands brushing together when they thought no one was looking. They were performing for an audience, building their narrative as a dynamic duo. My moment was scheduled for the final day, during the closing keynote address. The agenda simply read, "A vision for the future, an introduction to the new CEO of Apex Holdings." Until then, I was a ghost. The plan was simple. The outgoing chairman would take the stage, speak about the company's future, and then introduce me. I would walk out, and the truth would be revealed in the most public and dramatic way possible. I had prepared a speech, a vision for the company's future built on integrity, transparency, and accountability. It was a speech that would, by its very nature, be a condemnation of everything Leo and Sylvia had been doing. But then, at the welcome cocktail party on the first evening, Leo, emboldened by champagne and the thrill of the game, decided to orchestrate his own preemptive announcement. He gathered a group of his colleagues, pulled me over to stand awkwardly at the edge of the circle, and then delivered the speech about his special bonus, the board-approved trip to Monaco with Sylvia. He was creating his own reality, solidifying his alibi for abandoning me in front of everyone. He wanted witnesses to his professional triumph. He had no idea he was simply setting the stage for his own execution. As he stood there, beaming, his arm around his mistress, he looked over at me, the woman he thought was his harmless, clueless wife. And in that moment, I let him see it. Just for a second. I dropped the mask, and I let him see the cold, calculating fury in my eyes. A flicker of confusion crossed his face, a momentary crack in his confident facade. It was a warning shot. He didn't understand it, not yet. But he would. Oh, he would. DT. The flicker of confusion on Leo's face was fleeting, a brief tremor in his fortress of arrogance, before it was smoothed over by another wave of congratulations from his colleagues. He dismissed my expression as a trick of the light, a moment of wifely pique, nothing more. To him, I was a known quantity, a predictable variable in the equation of his life. He turned back to his audience, his charm dialed to its maximum setting, and continued to hold court. I took a deliberate step back, melting into the periphery of the crowd, a ghost at the feast once more. My work for the evening was done. I had planted a seed of doubt. Now I just had to watch it grow. The rest of the evening, and indeed the entire following day, became a masterclass in observation for me. The retreat was a microcosm of the company I was about to inherit, a living, breathing organism of ambition, insecurity, loyalty, and deceit. While Leo and Sylvia paraded around as the company's new power couple, I moved through the various cliques and conversations, not as a CEO, but as a spouse, a role that, I discovered, made me both invisible and a confidant. People spoke more freely around me, their guards lowered. Wives of other executives lamented their husbands' long hours, unaware they were speaking to the woman who would soon set the company's work-life balance policies. Junior managers, emboldened by alcohol, complained about the lack of transparency from senior leadership, not knowing they were giving direct feedback to their new ultimate boss. I learned more about the soul of Sterling Corp in those 24 hours than any report could have ever told me. I saw the rot, but I also saw the potential. There were good people here, talented and dedicated individuals who were being stifled by a culture that rewarded flashy self-promotion over quiet competence. A culture that allowed predators like Sylvia and criminals like Leo to flourish. Leo's performance was flawless in its audacity. He and Sylvia were attached at the hip. During the team-building exercises on the second day, a ridiculous series of trust falls and raft-building challenges. They were an inseparable team, their collaborative energy a tangible force. They framed it as a demonstration of their professional synergy, a preview of the dynamic leadership they offered. I saw it for what it was, a public consummation of their affair, disguised as a corporate activity. They were hiding in plain sight, their boldness their greatest shield. During one breakout session on ethical leadership, I found myself in the same group as Sylvia. Leo was on the other side of the room, schmoozing with a senior VP from the parent company. Sylvia, feeling confident, took the lead in our group discussion. Ethics, she proclaimed, her voice smooth and authoritative, is not about a rigid set of rules. It's about achieving the greatest good for the company. Sometimes, that requires making bold, unconventional choices that lesser minds might question. She looked around the table, her gaze daring anyone to challenge her. From across the room, she caught my eye and offered a small, condescending smile. It was a message. This is how the game is played. You wouldn't understand. I simply smiled back, a serene, placid expression that revealed nothing and concealed everything. She had no idea she was justifying her criminal conduct to the one person who held irrefutable proof of it. That evening, at the formal dinner, Leo was seated at a table with several key executives. I, as a mere spouse, was placed at a less prestigious table with other partners and a few mid-level managers. Leo seemed to think this was perfectly appropriate. He was in his element, regaling the table with exaggerated stories of his sales triumphs, with Sylvia occasionally interjecting to confirm his brilliance. From my vantage point, I had a clear view of their interactions. I watched as Leo's hand rested on Sylvia's back, just a little too low to be professional. I saw them exchange conspiratorial glances over the rim of their wine glasses. I saw her slip him a hotel room keycard under the table, a clumsy, arrogant gesture they thought was hidden from view. My blood ran cold, but my focus remained sharp. I wasn't just a wife watching her husband's affair unfold. I was a CEO watching an employee engage in behavior that exposed the company to massive liability. This was no longer just personal. It was a catastrophic failure of corporate governance. The case against them was building with every shared glance, every lingering touch, every lie they told. They were so busy performing their roles that they had forgotten the most important rule of the stage. There is always an audience. And their audience, the one person who mattered, was watching their every move with the cold, calculating precision of a seasoned investigator. The final act of their play was approaching, and I was the one who had written the ending. Later that night, back in the oppressive silence of our suite, the tension was a thick, suffocating blanket. Leo was euphoric, pacing the plush carpet with a glass of scotch in his hand, his mind still buzzing from the evening's performance. He was a conqueror recounting his victories, completely oblivious to the fact that he was standing in the crosshairs of his own downfall. "Did you see me with Henderson tonight?" he asked, not waiting for an answer. He was hanging on my every word. And Sylvia, God, she's a genius. The way she backed up my points about the new logistics software, we're a perfect team. The perfect team. He took a long swallow of his drink, his eyes distant, already imagining his ascent. When the new CEO sees what we bring to the table, what I bring to the table, it's a straight shot to the executive floor, Arya. A straight shot. I sat on the edge of the bed, my posture a study in practiced calm. I had changed into a simple silk robe, my face scrubbed clean of makeup. I was a blank canvas, giving him nothing to read. "It sounds like you made a strong impression," I said, my voice even, a placid lake over a raging abyss. He finally seemed to notice my stillness, my lack of participation in his triumphant fantasy. He stopped pacing and looked at me, a faint line of concern creasing his brow. It wasn't genuine worry. It was the annoyance of an actor whose scene partner has forgotten their line. "You've been quiet all weekend, Arya. Is everything okay?" "I'm just taking it all in," I replied, which was the absolute truth. "It's a very impressive event." He seemed satisfied with that, his ego too large to allow for any deeper introspection. He walked over and sat beside me on the bed, placing a hand on my knee. The touch felt alien, a violation. I had to summon every ounce of my self-control not to recoil. "I know this stuff must be boring for you," he said, his tone dripping with a patronizing sympathy that made my stomach clench. "All the corporate jargon, the schmoozing, it's not your world, but it's important for us, for our future." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "This Monaco trip is just the beginning. Sylvia has a vision, and she believes in me. She thinks I have the potential to run the entire European division one day. Can you imagine that? Us, living in Paris or Geneva." He was painting a future for us that he had already promised to another woman. The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. He was using me as a sounding board for the very lies that would facilitate his betrayal. He saw me as so utterly insignificant that he could confess his plans without even bothering to change the names. "What about my work?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. "My firm is here. My career is here." He waved a dismissive hand, as if swatting away a fly. "You're consulting. You could do that from anywhere. Or you wouldn't have to work at all. I'll be making more than enough for both of us. You could focus on decorating our new penthouse, maybe take up a hobby. You deserve a break." There it was. The final, clarifying insult. My career, The thing I had built with my own intellect and relentless hard work, the very thing that had secretly placed me at the pinnacle of his entire world, was just a little consulting project to him. A hobby I could discard once his grand destiny was realized. In his mind, I was an accessory, a decorative object to be placed in the beautiful life he was building for himself. He had no concept of me as a separate entity, a person with her own ambitions, her own power. I looked at him, truly looked at him, perhaps for the last time with any semblance of the woman he thought I was. I saw a hollow man, a glittering facade with nothing of substance behind it. The love I once felt was gone, replaced by a profound and chilling pity. He was a child playing dress-up in his father's suit, so enamored with his reflection that he couldn't see the cliff edge just behind him. "You're right," I said, and the placid look on my face finally broke into a genuine smile. It was a cold, sharp, predatory smile. "Maybe I do deserve a break." He misinterpreted it completely. He saw acceptance, the supportive wife finally getting on board. He grinned, relieved. "That's my girl," he said, leaning in to kiss me. I turned my head slightly, and his lips brushed my cheek. "I'm tired, Leo," I said, standing up. "It's been a long day. We have a big morning tomorrow." "You're right," he said, draining his glass. "Big morning. The new CEO announcement. The beginning of everything." He went to sleep that night with a smile on his face, dreaming of his bright future. I lay awake for hours, staring into the darkness, the evidence file on my tablet burning a hole in the nightstand. He thought tomorrow was the beginning. He had no idea it was the end. The storm was no longer coming. It had arrived. The atmosphere in the grand ballroom the next morning was electric. 1,000 of Sterling Corp's top leaders were packed into the room, a sea of expensive suits and palpable anticipation. The air hummed with nervous energy and whispered speculation about the new CEO. Would it be an internal promotion? An outside hire? A man? A woman? The questions hung in the air like the mist over the lake outside. I sat at my designated table. Once again relegated to the spouses section, Leo and Sylvia were at a prime table near the front, positioning themselves to be seen. Leo was practically vibrating with excitement, smoothing his tie, whispering animatedly to Sylvia. He looked like a man who believed his coronation was at hand. He caught my eye and gave me a confident wink, a final gesture of his complete and utter cluelessness. I offered a small, serene nod in return, the picture of wifely support. The lights dimmed, a hush fell over the crowd. The chairman of the board of Apex Holdings, a formidable man named Arthur Kensington, walked to the center of the stage. A spotlight followed him to the podium. His presence commanded absolute silence. "Good morning," Arthur's deep voice boomed through the sound system. "For 40 years, Sterling Corp has been a leader in its industry. We've built that legacy on a foundation of innovation, dedication, and, above all, integrity." He paused, letting the word hang in the air. From my seat, I had a perfect view of Leo and Sylvia. They both nodded sagely, the very picture of corporate integrity. Arthur continued, speaking about the challenges of the modern market and the need for bold new leadership. "The board has undertaken an exhaustive global search for a leader with the vision, the strength, and the moral compass to guide this company into the next decade. We sought a leader who understands that true success is not just about profit margins, but about the principles upon which that profit is built. We sought a turnaround artist, a strategist, a true innovator." The suspense was unbearable. You could feel the collective breath of the room being held. "It is my profound honor," Arthur said, his voice rising, "to announce that we have found that leader. Please join me in welcoming the new Chief Executive Officer of Apex Holdings, Ms. Aria Vance." For a full 3 seconds, there was absolute silence. The name registered, but the context didn't. Aria Vance? It was a name a few people might have known from the financial world, but it was not a name they expected to hear today. Then, a camera found me at my table, and my face appeared on the giant screens flanking the stage. The room erupted in a confused, chaotic murmur. Heads swiveled from the screen to me and back again. The sound was a tidal wave of shock. But I wasn't looking at the room. I was looking at one person. Leo. His face was a mask of utter, complete, and catastrophic disbelief. The confident smile was frozen, then it shattered, crumbling like ancient plaster. His skin went from a healthy tan to a sickly, ashen gray. His jaw hung open, his eyes wide with a horror so profound it was almost comical. He slowly turned his head from the screen to me, his movements stiff, robotic. His mind was short-circuiting, trying to reconcile two completely incompatible realities: the quiet, supportive wife at the back table, and the powerful woman on the giant screen, whose name had just been announced as his new supreme commander. Beside him, Sylvia's reaction was a mirror image of his own, her face a canvas of pure shock and dawning terror. The condescending smirk she had worn all weekend was gone, replaced by the panicked look of an animal caught in a trap. They both looked at me, their eyes pleading, questioning, terrified. Ignoring the chaos around me, I stood up. My movements were calm, graceful, and unhurried. I smoothed the lines of my simple, elegant dress and began to walk toward the stage. The murmuring in the room died down as I moved, replaced by a stunned, watchful silence. Every eye was on me. The whispers stopped. The only sound was the click of my heels on the polished floor. I walked past Leo and Sylvia's table. I didn't look at them, but I could feel their gazes burning into me. I could feel the heat of their imploding world. I reached the stage, shook Arthur's extended hand, and walked to the podium. The spotlight was warm on my face. I looked out at the 1,000 faces staring up at me, a sea of bewilderment. I adjusted the microphone, the small sound echoing through the silent hall. Then, I lifted my gaze and let it sweep across the room until it landed, with deliberate, unmistakable precision, on my husband. He was still frozen, a statue of broken arrogance. "Good morning," I said, and my voice, clear and steady and amplified to fill every corner of the room, was the sound of Judgment Day. "My name is Aria Vance, and I believe we have a great deal to talk about. Let's start with the subject of integrity." My opening words echoed in the cavernous ballroom, each syllable a chisel chipping away at the foundation of Leo's world. The silence that followed was different from before. It was no longer just shock, but a deep, unsettling reverence. 1,000 people were holding their breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Me. I kept my eyes locked on Leo. I wanted him to see that this was not a corporate address. It was a reckoning, delivered personally. His face was a mess of conflicting emotions. Panic warring with denial, his mind refusing to accept the impossible reality before him. Sylvia, beside him, had shrunk into her chair, her face pale and her eyes darting around as if seeking an escape route that didn't exist. "For the past 3 months," I began, my voice calm and measured, "I have been engaged in a comprehensive review of this company. I have examined our operations, our financials, and our culture. We have a great deal to be proud of. But pride can be a mask for complacency. And complacency," I paused, letting the word sink in, "is the soil in which corruption grows." A nervous ripple went through the room. This was not the standard, uplifting CEO welcome they had expected. "Effective immediately, this company will operate under a new doctrine. It is a doctrine of radical accountability and absolute transparency. There will be no more hidden corners. No more quiet arrangements. No more, quote, unconventional choices made in the name of the greater good." I used Sylvia's exact words from the breakout session, and I saw a flash of pure terror in her eyes. She understood. This was not a coincidence. Use puro more, I saw Leo's hand tremble as he reached for his water glass. His confident posture had collapsed. He was hunched over, his expensive suit suddenly looking like a costume that was 2 sizes too big. He was no longer a conqueror, he was a defendant in the dock, and his judge was the woman he had dismissed as a hobbyist. Accountability, I continued, my gaze sweeping the room now, making eye contact with the other executives, means that every dollar is tracked, every decision is documented, and every employee, from the mailroom to the boardroom, is held to the same unwavering standard of ethical conduct. There will be no special cases. There will be no discretionary rewards for those who believe the rules do not apply to them. I saw the executives nodding, their faces grim. They were beginning to understand the sea change that was coming. The era of easy expense accounts and wink-and-nod agreements was over. And transparency means this: we will no longer tolerate a culture where information is hoarded as a form of power. We will no longer tolerate employees who leverage personal relationships for professional gain, or who use company resources to fund lifestyles they have not earned. My eyes snapped back to Leo and Sylvia's table. It was a direct hit, and it landed with the force of a physical blow. Sylvia flinched as if I had slapped her. Leo's face, which had been pale, was now slick with a sheen of cold sweat. His breathing was shallow and rapid. The colleagues at their table began to subtly shift their chairs away, creating a small, imperceptible island of isolation around the two of them. They were becoming radioactive, and the fallout was just beginning. I understand that this new direction may be unsettling for some, I said, a masterpiece of corporate understatement. Change is always difficult. But let me be perfectly clear. This is not a suggestion, it is a mandate. Integrity is not a line item in our mission statement. It is the very air we will breathe. And those who cannot breathe that air will find that there is no longer a place for them at Sterling Corp. I let that final sentence hang in the air, a promise and a threat in one. The message was unmistakable. The game had changed. The rules were new. And I was the one who would be enforcing them. The era of Leo Vance was over. The era of Aria Vance had just begun. Having laid the philosophical groundwork, it was time to bring the hammer down. The room was still processing the tectonic shift in culture I had just announced. Now I would show them what it looked like in practice. To begin this new era of accountability, I said, my voice hardening, losing its corporate polish and taking on the sharp edge of an investigator, I am announcing an immediate and full-scale forensic audit of all expense reports, vendor contracts, and travel authorizations from the past 2 years, effective as of this moment. A collective gasp went through the ballroom. Audits were common, but an immediate forensic-level audit announced publicly at a leadership retreat was unprecedented. It was a declaration of war on the company's own established practices. This audit will be conducted by an independent firm that reports directly to my office. We will begin, I said, pausing for effect as I once again fixed my gaze on Leo's table, with the global sales division. The invisible island around Leo and Sylvia expanded. One of the vice presidents at their table suddenly found a pressing reason to check his phone, his face a mask of intense concentration as he physically angled his body away from them. Leo looked like he was going to be sick. He was trapped in a nightmare of his own making, broadcast on giant screens for 1,000 of his peers to witness. Furthermore, I continued, my tone relentless, all discretionary bonuses are hereby suspended, pending the results of this review. All non-essential international travel is also on hold. This includes, for example, any recently approved scouting trips to Monaco. I said the word Monaco with a delicate precision, letting it drop into the silent room like a cyanide pill. It was the kill shot. The public announcement of his special trip the night before, his moment of supreme arrogance, had now become the public evidence of his guilt. The connection was now unmistakable to everyone in the room. The new CEO wasn't speaking in hypotheticals, she was speaking about him. About them. The whispers started, a low, venomous hiss that spread from table to table. That's who he was talking about last night. Did you hear? He said the board approved it. Oh my God, she knows everything. Leo finally broke. His hand, shaking uncontrollably, knocked over his water glass. The sound of the shattering glass was like a gunshot in the silent room. Water spread across the white tablecloth, soaking the cuff of his suit. He didn't even notice. His eyes were wide with a primal terror, the look of a man who has not only been caught, but has realized, far too late, the true identity of his captor. Sylvia had abandoned all pretense of composure. Her face was buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking. Her carefully constructed persona of a powerful female executive had been stripped away, revealing the panicked, common fraudster beneath. The power couple of yesterday was now a public spectacle of disgrace. I ignored their collapse. I had one final piece of business. Patio. This company is a meritocracy, I declared, my voice ringing with absolute authority. Success will be rewarded. But it will be earned success, not stolen success. We will build a future based on the products we create and the services we provide, not on the cleverness of our accounting. Our work begins today, thank you. I gave a curt, final nod and turned from the podium. I did not look at Leo again. He no longer mattered. He was a piece of the past, a problem to be disposed of. As I walked off the stage, Arthur Kensington, the chairman, met me at the steps. The look on his face was a mixture of awe and profound respect. He had known, of course, about my investigation into Leo, but he had not known how I planned to handle it. "Ms. Vance," he said, his voice low and full of admiration. That was the most extraordinary corporate address I have ever witnessed. "Thank you, Arthur," I replied, my voice back to its calm, professional tone. "Please have security meet me in the Redwood conference room in 5 minutes. And have them escort Mr. Vance and Ms. Croft there as well. Tell them their presence is not optional." He nodded grimly. "Consider it done." As I walked through the ballroom, the crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. No one dared to speak to me, their faces a mixture of fear and respect. I was no longer an invisible spouse. I was an avenging angel, and the entire company had just witnessed the first swing of my sword. The purge had begun. The Redwood conference room was a cold, sterile space, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the serene lake. It was a place for high-stakes negotiations and board meetings, designed to be intimidating. Today it would serve as a tribunal. I sat at the head of the long mahogany table, my tablet placed neatly in front of me. Arthur Kensington sat to my right. 2 stern-looking security guards, both former law enforcement, stood impassively by the door. The door opened and Leo and Sylvia were escorted in. They looked like ghosts. The short walk from the ballroom had stripped them of any remaining shred of dignity. Their colleagues had averted their gazes, some with pity, most with contempt. The whispers had followed them, a chorus of their downfall. Leo's face was blotchy and his eyes were bloodshot. His tie was askew, the knot loosened in a desperate gasp for air. Sylvia looked even worse. Her makeup was smeared from crying and her hands trembled so violently she had to clench them in her lap to keep them still. They were no longer the power couple. They were defendants, stripped of their titles and their arrogance, standing before the woman they had fatally underestimated. "Sit," I said. It was not a request. They shuffled to the 2 chairs placed opposite me, a vast expanse of polished wood separating us. They sat stiffly, not looking at me, not looking at each other. For a full minute I said nothing. I simply let the silence press down on them. I wanted them to feel the full weight of their situation, the totality of their miscalculation. Finally I spoke, my voice devoid of all emotion. "I have in my possession," I began, gesturing to my tablet, "a comprehensive file documenting a conspiracy to defraud this company. The file includes falsified expense reports totaling over $200,000, fraudulent vendor contracts, and evidence of embezzlement. It also includes evidence of a coordinated effort to steal proprietary company data for personal gain." I looked at Leo. "It details your activities going back 24 months. Then I looked at Sylvia. "And it details your complicity and active participation since the day you arrived at this company." Leo finally found his voice. It was a weak, pathetic croak. "Aria, please, we can talk about this. The marriage, I know it's been." "Do not," I interrupted, my voice dropping to a dangerously low temperature. "Speak to me about our marriage. You forfeited that right a long time ago. We are not a husband and a wife having a disagreement. I am the chief executive officer of this company, and you are an employee who has been caught committing multiple federal crimes. That is the only relationship we have now." The finality of my words seemed to crush him. He slumped in his chair, all the fight draining out of him. Sylvia, however, decided to try a different tactic. "With all due respect, Ms. Vance," she began, attempting to summon some remnant of her former authority. "These are very serious accusations. I have a right to counsel." "You have the right to remain silent, Ms. Croft," I cut her off sharply. "And I strongly suggest you exercise it. Your rights will be fully afforded to you when the federal authorities arrive, which they will be doing shortly. My investigation is already in their hands." The last bit of color drained from her face. This wasn't just about losing her job. This was about prison. The reality of it hit her like a physical blow. "However," I said, leaning forward slightly, "before that happens, you have one and only one choice to make in this room today. I have prepared resignation and termination agreements for you both." I slid 2 folders across the table. "You can sign them now. Your resignation will be accepted, effective immediately. You will forfeit all bonuses, stock options, and severance. You will agree to cooperate fully with the ongoing investigation. If you do this, the company will not pursue a separate civil suit against you for the damages you have caused. We will leave your prosecution entirely in the hands of the government." I leaned back. "Or you can refuse to sign, in which case you will be terminated for cause, and I will unleash the full legal and financial power of this multi-billion-dollar corporation to ensure that, in addition to your criminal sentencing, you are financially ruined for the rest of your lives. I will sue you for fraud, for breach of contract, for reputational damage to this company. I will freeze your assets, and I will ensure you never work in this industry or any other again." I let the choice hang in the air. It was no choice at all. It was an execution, and I was merely offering them the option of a blindfold. Leo reached for the folder with a trembling hand, his movements clumsy. He didn't even read it. He just fumbled for the pen, his signature a barely legible scrawl. Sylvia hesitated for a moment, a last flicker of defiance in her eyes. She looked at me, at the woman who had been the quiet, invisible wife, and saw not a hint of mercy, not a trace of pity. She saw only the cold, hard face of justice. She picked up the pen and signed. "Security will escort you to your rooms," I said, my voice flat. "You will pack your personal belongings. You will then be escorted off the property. A car will be waiting to take you home. You are not to speak to anyone. Is that understood?" They both nodded mutely, their eyes vacant. They were broken. "Good," I said, standing up. My work here was done. I turned to Arthur. "Arthur, please have the legal team process this, and inform the board that the transition is proceeding smoothly." I walked to the door without a backward glance. I did not need to see them one last time. They were already ghosts, artifacts of a past I had surgically excised. As I stepped out of the conference room and back into the light, I took a deep breath. The air had never felt so clean. The storm had passed. The rest of the leadership retreat unfolded in a state of shell-shocked awe. The news of Leo and Sylvia's immediate resignations spread through the resort like wildfire, not as rumor, but as confirmed fact. The sight of them being escorted from the property by security, their faces pale and drawn, served as a stark, public confirmation of the new world order. My speech was no longer just a mission statement. It was a demonstration of power, and it had left an indelible mark on the psyche of the entire company. I spent the remainder of the day in a series of targeted meetings, not as an avenging angel, but as a pragmatic CEO. I met with the heads of the major divisions, the senior VPs, and the most influential managers. My tone was no longer fiery. It was calm, constructive, and forward-looking. I needed to transition from the person who tore down the old regime to the person who could build the new one. The fear was palpable in every room I entered. Executives who had once been masters of corporate swagger now sat before me with a newfound humility, their eyes searching my face for clues, for reassurance, for the new rules of survival. I gave it to them. "What you witnessed this morning was not about personal vendettas," I explained in a meeting with the top sales executives, many of whom had reported to Sylvia. It was about a fundamental, non-negotiable principle. The behavior of Mr. Vance and Ms. Croft was a cancer. It was not only criminal, but it created a culture where loyalty was valued over integrity, and where success was decoupled from ethics. We have excised that cancer. Now we heal. I laid out my initial vision: a flatter organizational structure, more autonomy for competent leaders, and a reward system based on transparent metrics, not favoritism. I listened to their concerns, answered their questions, and made it clear that my audit was not a witch hunt. I am not looking for minor infractions, I assured them. I am looking for patterns of systemic abuse. If your hands are clean, you have nothing to fear. If you have been complicit in the old way of doing things, I suggest you come to my office on Monday morning and tell me everything. Transparency will be your only path to redemption. It was an offer of amnesty, but also a clear warning. I was giving them a chance to get on the right side of history. Several, I could tell, were already taking mental inventory of their past actions, their faces a mixture of anxiety and relief. The most difficult meeting was with the women of the company. A group of senior female managers requested a private audience with me, and I granted it immediately. They entered the conference room with a mixture of apprehension and something else: hope. Ms. Vance, their spokesperson began, a sharp woman from the marketing department. What you did today, it was more than just a corporate restructuring. For years, women in this company have had to navigate a culture where a certain type of behavior from men in power was tolerated. We've watched as people like Sylvia Croft used their femininity as a weapon, while the rest of us were held to a different standard. We've been overlooked, underestimated. She trailed off, her voice thick with emotion. I understood completely. And you've seen men like Leo Vance fail upwards, their charisma mistaken for character, I finished for them. They all nodded, a silent, powerful affirmation. That ends now, I said, my voice softer, more personal than it had been all day. This company will be a true meritocracy. Your work will speak for you. Your gender, your personal relationships, who you play golf with, none of it will matter. Only your results and your integrity. I am not here to be a female CEO. I am here to be the CEO, and I expect every one of you to hold me to the same standard I hold everyone else. I saw tears in the eyes of some of the women. They were tears of relief, of a burden being lifted. In that moment, I wasn't just their boss. I was a symbol of a change they had long since given up hope for. That evening, I ate dinner alone in my suite. The quiet was a welcome respite from the whirlwind of the day. The adrenaline was fading, and in its place, a profound sense of exhaustion, but also a deep, quiet satisfaction. I had done it. I had exposed the lies, purged the corruption, and set a new course. My phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. My heart skipped a beat, thinking it might be Leo, a last, desperate plea. But it wasn't. It was from the marketing manager who had been the spokesperson for the women's group. Thank you, the text read, from all of us. You're the CEO we didn't know we were waiting for. I looked out the window at the dark, placid lake. The storm was over. The long, difficult work of rebuilding was about to begin. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt truly, completely free. The weeks that followed the retreat were a blur of controlled chaos. I returned to corporate headquarters, not as Aria Vance the consultant, but as Aria Vance the CEO, and the ripple effect of my public coronation was immediate and profound. The forensic audit I had launched began its work with terrifying efficiency, and the initial findings were even worse than I had suspected. Leo and Sylvia were not an isolated case. They were merely the most blatant symptom of a deeply ingrained culture of entitlement and lax oversight. The offer of amnesty I had made proved to be a stroke of genius. My office was a revolving door of nervous executives, each coming forward to confess their own smaller sins. The padded expense reports, the friendly vendor contracts, the personal trips disguised as business. They laid their transgressions on my desk like offerings to a new god, hoping for mercy. Isham Taka. I was not merciful, but I was fair. For those whose confessions revealed minor, opportunistic greed, the penalty was restitution and a formal reprimand placed in their permanent file. They kept their jobs, but they were now on a very short leash. their careers dependent on absolute, unwavering compliance with the new rules. They were the lucky ones. For those whose confessions revealed a deeper, more calculated pattern of deceit, the consequences were more severe. Several senior managers were quietly terminated, their departures announced in bland corporate memos about pursuing other opportunities. The message was clear. There was a path to survival, but not for everyone. The purge continued, not with a guillotine, but with a scalpel. Leo and Sylvia, meanwhile, were facing the full force of the U.S. justice system. The evidence against them was so overwhelming that their lawyers immediately sought a plea bargain. They pleaded guilty to wire fraud and conspiracy. Sylvia, in an attempt to lessen her sentence, tried to claim she was a victim of Leo's manipulation, a woman swept up in the charisma of a powerful man. The prosecution presented the audio recording from the private investigator, where she was heard mocking me and boasting about her control over Leo. Her claim was swiftly dismissed. Leo, stripped of his charm and his power, was a pathetic figure in court. He cried. He apologized to the company, to the court, to his family. He never mentioned my name. In the end, Sylvia was sentenced to 18 months in a low-security federal prison. Leo, as the primary architect of the more extensive fraud, received a sentence of 3 years. Their falls from grace were complete, their names becoming a cautionary tale whispered in the hallways of Sterling Corp. My personal life underwent an equally seismic shift. The divorce was swift and uncontested. Leo, facing prison and financial ruin, had no grounds and no energy to fight. He signed whatever papers my lawyer put in front of him. Our beautiful home was sold, the assets divided. I took nothing that had been purchased with the proceeds of our joint account since the fraud began. I wanted nothing to remind me of that life, of that lie. I moved into a sleek, modern apartment in the city, a place that was mine and mine alone. It was minimalist and clean, a physical manifestation of my new, uncluttered life. The quiet, supportive wife was gone forever, and in her place stood a woman who was entirely, unapologetically, herself. The most unexpected ripple effect was my relationship with Leo's family. I had expected them to close ranks around their son, to view me as the vindictive wife who had destroyed him. I was wrong. His father called me a week after the retreat. His voice was heavy with shame. "Arya," he said, we had no idea. What he did to you, to the company, there are no words. I am so deeply, truly sorry." He explained that the family was reeling, not just from the crime, a perpetraio, but from the betrayal. The son they had been so proud of was a stranger. I became, in a strange twist of fate, a source of stability for them. I provided them with honest answers, explaining the scope of what Leo had done without malice or triumphalism. I helped them understand that his actions were his own, a product of a flaw in his character that had nothing to do with them. They were victims, too, in their own way. In the end, they disowned him not because I had asked them to, but because he had proven himself unworthy of the family name. My own career, ironically, became the ultimate testament to the new Sterling Corp. My story, once a closely guarded secret, became the stuff of legend in the business world. The CEO who uncovered a massive fraud scheme on her first day because the primary culprit was her own husband. I was featured in business magazines, hailed as a new icon of corporate governance. I always steered the narrative away from the personal drama, focusing instead on the principles of integrity and accountability. But the human element was undeniable, and it made the story powerful. Sterling Corp began to thrive under its new doctrine. With the rot cleared out, the talented, ethical employees who had been languishing were now empowered. Innovation flourished. Profits soared. We became a case study for how a culture of integrity could be a powerful driver of financial success. One afternoon, about a year after the retreat, my assistant informed me I had a visitor without an appointment. It was Spencer, Leo's older brother. I hadn't seen him since before the scandal. He stood awkwardly in my office, looking around at the symbols of my new life. "Arya," he said, I wanted to say I'm sorry. For him. And I wanted to say thank you. You didn't just save a company, you kind of saved our family too. From continuing to believe in a lie." He handed me a small, clumsily wrapped package. "This is from my mom, she wanted you to have it." Later, after he left, I opened it. It was a small, framed photograph, but it wasn't of Leo, or of me and Leo. It was a picture of me, taken at a family barbecue years ago. I was in the background, laughing at something one of the children had said. I was just me. On the back, Leo's mother had written a simple note. "We see you now, Arya, we see you." And as I looked at that picture, I realized the ultimate truth. Leo's greatest crime against me wasn't the affair, or the theft, or the lies. It was that he had made me invisible, even to myself, and in the process of bringing him down, I had finally, fully, come into view. The quiet one had found her voice, and she would never be silenced again. 2 years passed. The name Leo Vance became a footnote in the history of Sterling Corp, a cautionary tale for new recruits. The company, under my leadership, had not just recovered, it had soared. We became the industry benchmark for ethical business practices, proving that profitability and principle could coexist. My life had found a new quiet rhythm. The long hours were still there, but they were fueled by passion, not by the need to escape a hollow home life. I had built a team I trusted implicitly, and a life outside of work that was authentically mine. The call came on a crisp autumn afternoon. It was from Leo's father, a man with whom I now shared a gentle, infrequent correspondence. Birthday cards, holiday greetings, a mutual acknowledgement of a shared, painful history. "Arya," he said, his voice strained, "I'm sorry to bother you. I felt you had a right to know before you saw it in the news, or heard it somewhere else. Leo is being released." The words hung in the air, heavy and unwelcome. "He was granted parole," his father continued, the shame evident in his tone. "Good behavior," they said. "He served just over 2 years. I felt a cold stillness settle over me. But it wasn't fear. It was the same icy calm I'd felt at the retreat. The dispassionate focus of a strategist assessing a new, unexpected variable. I had intellectually known this day would come, but the reality of it was still jarring. The ghost I had so thoroughly exorcised was about to be let out of its cage. "Thank you for telling me, Anthony," I said, my voice steady. "I appreciate it." "He knows the terms of our family's position," he added hastily. "He is not welcome here. He has been told not to contact you. I don't know what his plans are, but I wanted you to be prepared." We ended the call, and I swiveled my chair to look out at the sprawling city skyline from my corner office. Leo was free. The man who had built his life on deception, who had stolen from my company and my heart, was now free to walk the same streets I did. My security chief had protocols in place, of course. My photo was flagged, my buildings were on high alert. But this wasn't a matter of physical safety. It was about the potential breach of the peace I had fought so hard to build. For 2 weeks, there was nothing. The silence was almost more unnerving than contact would have been. I found myself half expecting to see him across a crowded restaurant, or to receive a blocked call on my phone. The ghost remained a ghost. I began to think that perhaps, just perhaps, he had learned his lesson and would simply disappear into a new, anonymous life. Then, a letter arrived. It was not sent to my apartment, but to my office, hand-delivered by a courier. The envelope was plain, my name and title written in a hesitant, unfamiliar script. But I knew the handwriting. It was a shadow of his former confident scrawl, smaller, more cramped, as if the writer had been diminished. My first instinct was to have security shred it. I owed him nothing. No explanation, no audience, no acknowledgement. But curiosity, a trait essential to both my survival and my success, won out. I slit the envelope open with a silver letter opener, a gift from the board commemorating my first year as CEO. The letter was short, written on cheap, plain paper. "Arya, I know I have no right to write to you. I know you never want to see or hear from me again, and I will respect that if you tell me to. I am not writing to ask for forgiveness. I know that what I did is unforgivable. I am not writing to make excuses. There are none. Beijio, prison gives a man a lot of time to think. All I did was think. I have replayed every moment of my life, of our life, and I see it all clearly now. I see the man I was, a hollow shell, a fraud, a thief. I stole your love, your trust, and your money. all while believing I was a titan of industry. I was a child playing a game, and I hurt everyone who ever cared about me. I am a different man now. Not a better man, not yet, but a different one. The arrogance is gone, burned out of me under the fluorescent lights and the weight of my own shame. Hiai Sai. I am asking for one thing, and one thing only: 10 minutes of your time. Not to relitigate the past, but to say the things to your face that I was too cowardly and too broken to say in court. I want to apologize to you not as a legal strategy, but as the first and only step I can take toward whatever comes next for me. If you say no, I will disappear and you will never hear from me again. The choice is entirely yours. On tai, Neddle, on tai, Zalo, on tais. I read the letter 3 times. The tone was completely alien. The swagger, the charm, the manipulation, it was all gone. In its place was a stark, barren humility. It could be a trick, of course. The ultimate con from a master con man. But my instincts, the ones honed by years of reading people and financial statements, told me it was genuine. This wasn't a play for sympathy or a backdoor attempt at reconciliation. It was the final, desperate act of a man who had hit rock bottom and was trying to find a single, solid stone to place as a new foundation. He had ended the letter by giving me the choice. It was the first time in our entire relationship that he had ever truly given me power over him. The old Leo would have shown up unannounced, relying on his charm to force a confrontation. This new Leo was asking for permission. And in that, I saw an opportunity, not for him, but for me. There was one final thread left untied, one last piece of business to conduct in the saga of Leo Vance. I had dismantled his career, exposed his crimes, and ended our marriage. But I had never truly confronted the man himself, face to face, since he had been stripped of all his power. I had never had my final say. I buzzed my assistant. "Jessica," I said, "get me the head of security, and find a neutral, secure location for a brief meeting. An empty office in a building we own downtown would be perfect. I want it swept for recording devices, and I want a 2-man security team present, but out of sight." "Of course, Ms. Vance," she said. "Who will you be meeting with?" I took a deep breath. "An old employee," I replied, "by the name of Leo Vance." The meeting was set for a Tuesday afternoon in a vacant office on the 34th floor of a building Sterling Corp owned. The space was a ghost office, fully furnished but unoccupied, used for confidential meetings. It was a sterile, impersonal environment, which was exactly what I wanted. There were no memories here, no emotional attachments. It was a clean slate. My security team, led by a formidable ex-Secret Service agent named David, had strenuously advised against it. "Ms. Vance, this is an unnecessary risk," he had argued. "He's unpredictable. We can't know his mental state." "His mental state," I had replied calmly, "is the entire point of the meeting." "I am not at risk, David, he is. This is not a negotiation. It is a debriefing, and I will be the one conducting it." I arrived 10 minutes early. David and another agent were already there, having swept the room and established positions in an adjoining office where they could see and hear everything without being seen. I sat in a sleek leather armchair, not behind a desk, but in a small seating area. I wanted the encounter to be direct, with no barriers between us. At precisely 3 p.m., Leo was escorted in by a lobby guard and handed off to David, who led him into the room. The man who walked through the door was a stranger, wearing my ex-husband's face. The physical change was shocking. The prison diet and stress had stripped him of 30 pounds, leaving his formerly handsome features looking gaunt and sharp. His expensive suit was gone, replaced by simple, ill-fitting slacks and a button-down shirt that looked like it had come from a discount store. His hair was shorter, flecked with gray at the temples. But the most profound change was in his eyes. The old fire, the arrogant, charming glint, was gone. It had been extinguished completely. In its place was a deep, weary hollowness, the look of a man who had stared into an abyss and seen his own reflection. He carried himself differently, his shoulders slumped, his movements uncertain. The swagger had been replaced by a hesitant deference. He stopped just inside the door, his eyes fixing on me. He didn't smile. He just looked, his expression a mixture of shame and something that looked like awe. "Hello, Leo," I said, my voice even. "Arya," he breathed, his voice raspy. "Thank you for seeing me." "You have 10 minutes," I said, gesturing to the armchair opposite mine. He sat down cautiously, perching on the edge of the seat as if he didn't deserve its comfort. He wrung his hands, his knuckles white. I don't know where to begin," he stammered. "Begin with why you wanted this meeting," I prompted, keeping my tone professional, detached. He took a deep breath. "To apologize," he said, finally meeting my gaze directly. "And to tell you that I know an apology is meaningless. It doesn't fix anything. It doesn't give you back the years I stole from you, or erase the humiliation I put you through. But it's the only thing I have left to offer. I lied to you. From the beginning, our entire life was built on my ambition, and I used your love as fuel for it. I saw you as a part of my story, not as a person with your own. That was my greatest crime. The money, the affair, those were just symptoms of the real disease. The disease was me." He spoke without artifice, the words simple, direct, and brutal in their self-assessment. The old Leo would have woven a tapestry of excuses, of justifications. This man offered none. "When you were revealed as the CEO," he continued, a faint, mirthless smile touching his lips. "For a moment, I thought I was having a psychotic break. It was so impossible. The quiet, supportive wife, the woman I thought I had figured out completely, was secretly the most powerful person I had ever met. The irony was so perfect, so complete. It was like God himself had written the ending to my story just to teach me a lesson. You didn't just expose me, Arya. You held up a mirror, and you forced me to see the pathetic, arrogant fool I really was. You were always 10 steps ahead of me. In business, in life, in character. I just was too blind to see it." He looked down at his hands. "I am sorry," he said, his voice finally breaking. "I am sorry for everything. For Sylvia. For the lies. For the contempt I showed you. For underestimating you. That, I think, was the most foolish thing I ever did." I listened, my expression unreadable. I analyzed his words, his body language, his tone. There was no deception there. It was the raw, unvarnished truth of a broken man. "Tabachayever," he had said his piece. Now it was my turn. "Pachayever." He looked up at me, his eyes expectant, waiting for my response. He seemed prepared for anything, for anger, for tears, for a lecture. He was not prepared for what I gave him. "I accept your apology, Leo," I said, and I watched as a flicker of surprise, of profound relief, crossed his face. "Not because I need it," I continued, my voice calm and precise, "and not because it changes anything about the past. I accept it because your apology is not for me, it's for you. It's the first honest transaction you've made in a decade. It shows that you have, at long last, understood the nature of your own bankruptcy." He nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of my words. "You're right," I went on. "You did underestimate me. Everyone did. That was my greatest advantage. You saw a quiet wife, so you didn't see the strategist. You saw a supportive partner, so you didn't see the investigator. You saw a woman, so you didn't see the CEO. You weren't just unfaithful to a wife, Leo. You committed fraud against a forensic expert. You played a game of chess against a grandmaster, without ever realizing you were on the board." I leaned forward slightly, my tone shifting from analytical to personal for the first and only time. "You talk about your crimes, about the money and the affair. But I want you to understand what you truly took from me, and what you inadvertently gave me. You took my trust. You took the beautiful, naive idea I had of our life together. And for that, there can be no restitution. But in taking those things," I said, my voice regaining its strength, "you gave me something far more valuable. You gave me clarity. You forced me to stop being an accessory in my own life, and to become the protagonist. You wanted to run the European division? I now run the entire global corporation. You wanted a penthouse in Geneva? I can buy the building. You wanted power? I have come to understand what real power is. It's not about charm or expensive suits or backroom deals, Leo. It's the quiet, unshakable knowledge of your own worth. And that is something you can never have, and that I will never lose again. I stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. The 10 minutes were over. He stood as well, a man completely dwarfed by the presence in the room. He looked smaller than when he had walked in, stripped bare not by my anger, but by my absolute indifference to his fate. My forgiveness was not a gift of compassion, it was an act of dismissal. He no longer had the power to hurt me, so his apology was simply data, an acknowledgement of a resolved issue. "What will you do now?" I asked. It was not a question of concern, but one of finality. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Try to be a man my father isn't ashamed of. That's all I've got." "I wish you luck with that, Leo," I said, and I meant it in a distant, abstract way. His success or failure was irrelevant to me now. His story was his own to write. My book had an entirely different title. "Goodbye, Arya," he said. "Goodbye, Leo," I replied. I turned and walked toward the adjoining office where my security team was waiting, not looking back. David opened the door for me. As I stepped through, I heard Leo say one last thing, so softly I almost missed it. "He was always proud of you, you know. Even at the end. Prouder of you than he ever was of me." I stopped for a single heartbeat, but I did not turn around. I walked out, leaving him alone in the ghost office, a relic of a life I no longer lived. The final thread had been cut. The final word had been spoken. And it was mine. As I rode the express elevator down from the 34th floor, I felt a sense of lightness I hadn't known I was missing. It was the feeling of a final account being closed, a last piece of old business being archived away forever. Seeing Leo had not been painful. It had not been triumphant. It had been, simply, necessary. It was like visiting a historical battlefield long after the war was over. The violence was a distant memory, and all that remained was a quiet landscape, forever changed but no longer actively at war. When I stepped out into the bustling city street, the late afternoon sun felt warm on my face. The world seemed sharper, more vibrant. The ghost was gone. He was no longer a potential threat, lurking in the shadows of my mind. He was just a man named Leo, a sad story from a long time ago. That evening I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my parents. I had kept them at arm's length during the scandal, protecting them from the sordid details. But now, I told them everything. I told them about the lies, the investigation, the confrontation at the retreat, and the meeting I'd had that afternoon. I let them see the whole picture, the strength I had been forced to find. "My God, Arya," my mother said, her voice filled with awe. "We had no idea. We are so proud of you." In that moment, I realized I was finally integrating the two halves of myself. The powerful, formidable CEO was also the daughter who needed her parents' pride. The strategist who could dismantle a criminal conspiracy was also the woman who could feel the quiet satisfaction of a chapter truly, finally, being closed. The next day at the office, it was business as usual, but something within me had shifted. During a high-level strategy session, debating a multi-billion-dollar acquisition, I found my focus sharper, my decisions more intuitive. The small part of my mind that had been subconsciously reserved for the Leo problem was now free, its resources reallocated to building the future. A few months later, I promoted the woman who had spoken for the women's group at the retreat to be my new chief marketing officer. She had proven herself with talent and integrity, and her appointment sent a clear message throughout the company. The meritocracy was real. The culture had truly changed. I started to date again, cautiously at first. I met a man, an architect, whose passion was in building things that were beautiful, functional, and above all, transparent. There were no hidden rooms, no false facades in his designs or in his character. He was drawn not to my power or my title, but to the quiet confidence he saw in me. He knew my story. It was impossible not to. And it didn't intimidate him. It impressed him. For the first time, I felt seen for who I truly was, both the strategist and the woman. One evening, standing with him on the balcony of my apartment, looking out at the glittering tapestry of the city lights, I thought back to that man in the ghost office. I hoped he found his way. I hoped he built a new life, a small, honest one, far away from the world he had tried to conquer. His fate was his own, a story I was no longer a character in. Iasoun Nafi. My story was here. In the city stretching out before me, in the thriving company I had rebuilt on a foundation of integrity, in the quiet strength I felt deep in my bones. Leo's betrayal had been a fire, intended to destroy my world. But he had forgotten something fundamental about fire. Sometimes, it doesn't just destroy. Sometimes, it forges. It burns away the impurities, clarifies the landscape, and tempers steel. Etente or. I had walked through the fire and come out the other side, not burned but strengthened. The view from my new life was vast and clear, and tomorrow stretched out before me, a landscape of infinite possibility, all of it my own. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.